Welcome to Curiosity Repo. So, have you ever wondered why an entire town would just pack up and disappear? Today, we're diving into what really happened to some of the world's most incredible ghost towns. We're talking about everything from cities built on top of a fire that never goes out to digital worlds that cost billions but are totally empty. And you know what? The reasons they failed are way more surprising and a lot more relevant to us today than you'd think. Okay, just try to imagine this. You live in a town where the very ground under your feet is on fire. And I'm not being poetic. I mean a real, unstoppable coal fire that kicked off way back in 1962 and is still burning right now. It's this underground inferno that's just slowly but surely swallowing a whole community from below. Now, picture something else entirely. We're talking peak 1970s glamour, a beach resort so fancy that people like Elizabeth Taylor used to vacation there. One day, it's the absolute jewel of the Mediterranean, and the next, poof, it's a fenced-off wasteland, totally frozen in time. But what if I told you the newest, most expensive ghost towns aren't even real? I mean, they're not made of bricks or stone. They're digital. They cost tens of billions of dollars to build, and yet, they're almost completely empty.
So you've got these unstoppable fires, unbelievable arrogance, sudden conflicts. The reasons for these places vanishing are just wild. So what's the connection here? What really causes entire communities to just disappear, leaving nothing but echoes behind? Well, we're about to connect the dots, and the patterns are pretty shocking.
All right, let's get into it. We're going to start with the place that basically defines the disaster ghost town, Centralia, Pennsylvania. Before it became famous for the fire, Centralia was your classic American town built on one thing, coal. And not just any coal, but anthracite, this super dense stuff that burns incredibly hot. For a long time, the town was doing great, a busy little community built right on top of its most valuable resource. But that resource, well, it turned out to be its own curse.
You see, this wasn't some sudden explosion. This was a catastrophe playing out in super slow motion. It all started with something that sounds totally normal, a trash fire at the local landfill in '62. But that fire accidentally lit an underground vein of coal. For years, nobody really knew how bad it was. Then, by 1979, things got weird. The ground started heating up. But the real turning point? 1981. A sinkhole, steaming with toxic gas, opened up in a kid's yard and almost swallowed him whole. That's when everyone realized the terrifying truth. The very ground they lived on was literally burning away beneath them. So, after decades of the government trying to buy people out and all these legal fights, a town that once had over 1,500 people is now down to just 5. That's it. 5 people living out their lives on top of a fire that scientists think could keep burning for another 100 years. It's just a chilling reminder of a disaster that no one could figure out how to stop. Okay, so we've seen a town wiped out by a slow-motion disaster. But what happens when a community is abandoned on purpose? You know, not by accident, but by human conflict. That story takes us to Varosha. And the collapse here was just unbelievably fast. In the early 70s, Varosha was the place to be. But in 1974, a military conflict split the island of Cyprus. The entire population, fearing for their lives, fled. Literally overnight. The area was immediately fenced off with barbed wire, and for almost 50 years, it's just been sitting there. It's a perfect time capsule of decay, a place of total luxury that's now just a haunting symbol of a political fight that never got resolved. So a town can die from a disaster or a war, but what if it fails just because of one guy's colossal arrogance? Well, that's the story of Fordlandia. It was Henry Ford's completely bizarre attempt to build a perfect little slice of America right in the middle of the Amazon rainforest. Now, Ford's goal was actually pretty practical. He wanted his own supply of rubber for his car tires. But his method? Oh boy. He didn't just want a plantation. He wanted to export his vision of American culture. He banned alcohol, forced his Brazilian workers to eat hamburgers, and, get this, made square dancing mandatory. All while making them work a rigid 9-to-5 shift, which makes absolutely no sense in the scorching jungle heat. The clash of cultures was just bound to explode. And this quote really sums up how absurd it all was. The final straw? Ford switched the dining hall to a self-service cafeteria. The workers found this deeply insulting. They rioted, grabbed machetes, and literally chased the American managers deep into the jungle.
In the end, Ford's utopia was a total failure because he thought he could force the Amazon and its people to bend to his will. He never even tried to adapt. And all of this brings us to a really crucial point. The most mind-blowing ghost towns aren't just sitting in a history book, they're actually being built right now. And, as you're about to see, they look very, very different. Just look at these numbers. They're staggering. In China, this massive real estate bubble has created something like 65 million empty homes. Entire cities built with nobody to actually live in them. And then you've got the digital world, where Meta has poured over $60 billion into its metaverse, a virtual reality that's pretty much a vast, empty wasteland. And this is where it gets really interesting. Meta's metaverse is basically the Fordlandia of our time. I mean, think about it. Both were created out of the sheer arrogance of a powerful visionary who thought they could just build a brand new world from nothing. Ford failed because he ignored culture and nature. Meta is failing because it's a solution without a problem. It's a digital utopia that almost nobody actually wants or needs. So who is actually hanging out in this multi-billion-dollar world? Well, it turns out the huge majority of users are under 16. That's a group that's really hard to make money from. You combine that with huge privacy issues and the fact that there's just no compelling reason for most adults to stick around, and what do you get? You get the digital version of an empty city, all this expensive infrastructure, and no one living there. So what do all these stories actually tell us? From a mine that's on fire to a metaverse that's empty, what's the lesson here? Well, it turns out there are some really clear patterns for why communities fail. And it's not just us asking these questions. Researchers at places like the University of Oxford are looking at this, because understanding why places fail isn't just a history lesson. It's about figuring out how to build things that last. It really gets to the core of this huge question: how do we build communities that can actually survive?
So you can pretty much boil it all down to 4 main reasons. First, you've got catastrophe, like Centralia's endless fire. Second, there's conflict, which froze the paradise of Varosha in time. Third is hubris. That's the big, flawed visions of guys like Henry Ford and Mark Zuckerberg, creating worlds that nobody asked for. And finally, you have speculation, which gives us the empty ghost cities in China, places built as financial bets, not as home. In the end, it doesn't really matter if it's a burning coal seam or a line of bad code. The reasons these places fail are like a mirror. They show us our own weaknesses, our relationship with the planet, with each other, with our economies, and especially with our own arrogance. So I've got to ask, which of these stories really gets to you? The town with the endless fire, the paradise that's frozen in time, the failed utopia in the jungle, or the digital wasteland? Let us know what you think down in the comments. Thanks so much for watching. If you want more explainers like this from Curiosity Repo, where we break down the world's biggest questions, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We'll see you in the next one.